Hello everyone and welcome back to week 2 of month of MERN. For the past 2 weeks we have focused heavily on the front end. We have learned the fundamentals of HTML, CSS, JavaScript and React. But today we will shift our focus to the back end, understanding and learning about JSON and APIs using Node.js, Express and storing that data in a database called MongoDB. We will start uh, as always with some memes. So for the past 2 weeks, we did focus on the front end, but mostly full stack developers are really good at the back end and use third-party libraries such as Bootstrap, Material UI, and other component libraries to build better UI interfaces. So let's start by understanding the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. So, uh, Node, we will be using Node for this. So let me just quickly create a new folder. So let's start by understanding the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. So JavaScript or Node.js runtimes are often described as a single-threaded event loop type of language whereby an event loop is running continuously over and over again. Um, could anyone tell me what is a promise in JavaScript? Have you heard about a promise? Feel free to leave it in on Discord or unmute as well. What is a promise in JavaScript? I see people are typing. You don't know. Okay. So, okay, let me before we learn about the event loop, let's try and understand what a promise is. So, in JavaScript, a promise represents a value that is unknown for now, but that we might know in the future. Think of it like Ola. When you request a cab, the rider will make you a promise to pick you up. When you are waiting, the ride is pending. And in the future, if everything goes well and the driver will resolve that promise, pick you up and take you somewhere, at which point the promise will be fulfilled. But in case we book a ride to the station, the driver may reject your ride, and in that case you will have to catch another ride. So I threw a couple of words here. The rider makes a promise. When you are waiting, the promise is pending, and in the future the promise will be resolved or fulfilled. And in case you book a ride to maybe the station or somewhere where the driver does not want to go, he will reject the promise of picking you up. So for now, make a promise, resolve a promise, fulfill a promise, reject a promise, or catch the error. So let's try and create a promise in uh, in JavaScript. So here I'm creating a new promise. So a promise is a JavaScript object, and the first argument that the promise takes is an executor. So I will just write an arrow function. So this arrow function will run on creation of this promise, and it is called the executor. It will take in two arguments, resolve and reject. So these two arguments are already given to me by this promise. And here let me just write some code. If picked up var picked up is true, and I'll just write maybe picked up. If picked up is true, then I want to resolve the promise and say that driver arrived. Otherwise, I will reject the promise and say driver cancelled the ride. Okay, so what is happening here? So this is a JavaScript promise. So this variable ride will return a promise. What is a promise? In JavaScript, we can create our own promise. This I have created my own promise. I have said that uh, if this variable is true, then I want to resolve the promise. Otherwise, I want to reject the promise. And these resolve and reject are given to me by the executioner, which is this arrow function by default. So I didn't have to do anything. Any questions thus far? I created a promise. I called the resolve function to resolve that promise if something happens. Otherwise, in other cases, I want to reject that promise. So, okay, now how do I use this promise? I can use this promise by calling it and using dot then I can pass another arrow function inside this then and say that get me the response of that promise and just console.log the response. So write promise whenever this promise is fulfilled, then get the response and console.log the response. So I will be using Node.js. I have Node.js on my installed on my machine, and I can run JavaScript inside of that environment by saying node file name. So here I see that the driver arrived is printed to the console. That means that this promise is fulfilled. ये promise सही था. क्यों? क्योंकि picked up जो variable था वो true था. So picked up is equal to true. Therefore this promise is resolved. But let's say this is false. Uh, what do you think I'll get here? Any guesses? What will happen now? Yeah, it is false. So it will go in this else case and the promise will be rejected. But what will be printed here is my question. When I press enter, what will be printed here?
Driver cancel the ride.
No, that won't be printed because here the promise is rejected and the dot then method will only get the response when the promise is resolved. So here to catch the error, I can say catch, take in the error, and then I can console.log the error instead. So here if the write is successful, get the response, log the response, resolve वाला. और अगर कुछ गलत होता है, something goes wrong, then in which case the promise is rejected, then console.log the error. So now if I run this with the error, the error is printed in the console. Okay, great. Any questions thus far about promises, resolving and rejecting promises? We will understand why this promises in JavaScript are really important when we learn about event loops in some time. Okay, so make sure you all fill the quiz that is on Discord right now. If you have answered. Okay, great. I see a lot of yeses. Amazing. Um, all right, now let's try and fetch some data from the internet. using fetch. So when we write our front end applications, we often need data from the internet. We need to fetch, we need to get somehow data from the internet. So we use something called as the fetch API that is built in to inside the browsers. But because for now I'm using a Node environment and I'm using version 16 of Node, fetch is not yet inbuilt, but I think the current version, the bleeding edge version that is not yet stable, has no fetch inbuilt. We might get it in a couple of months, but for now I'll have to install a package called node fetch to use fetch. But don't worry about it, the browser has fetch inbuilt. So I will just import node fetch. Say what do I need to import? Fetch. Okay, so now I have access to fetch. So what the fetch API does is, given an endpoint, it will make a request to that endpoint. So we just now learned about promises. Let's open it on side mein. So let me just create a new variable like I created ride ka. So here I will create a variable called promise, and I will call the fetch API and pass it in a URL endpoint. So let me just get a placeholder. Matlab, this is an open free to use API URL to get data from the internet. Matlab, on this URL data will be requested by fetch. Okay, I fetched over here. I fetched ये endpoint पे, and now I need to access its data. So what fetch returns is a promise. As I hover over here, I can see a promise, and उसका type है response. Response करके एक object रहता है, वो इसका type है. तो this promise variable is returning a promise. So now I can chain dot then over here and get the response. So I can say response, and I can log that response. Okay. So can any guesses what will happen here? What is happening right now? I made an API call to this endpoint, and I console.log the response it gave me. What will happen when I run this file? Node of fetch.js. Any guesses? What will happen when I run this? I see people are typing. Before that, let me just share this uh, for reference. So this is just an API endpoint where which you can use. Okay. So what will happen? Let's just try and find out. What this will do is this will print something called as the response object to the console, which we'll see in just a moment. Is really cryptic. Before that, let me just set the type to module to support this import and exports. Okay, so here we see whatever this API endpoint returned to the promise. So this was returned, but unfortunately this is not what we need, right? We need JSON. So on the response object there is a method built in called JSON, And what we are doing here is we are returning that response. And now what this .json does, this also returns a promise, right? So now to get access to that result, we will write another dot then, and here we can get access to the response. So here I can say console.log json. So a promise first then or next then. And now if I run this, I get all this response, which are just random placeholder text with user id, random id, and some text, to do text. So this is an array of objects which is returned to us by using by JSON. So now if something goes wrong, we can catch the error and just console.log that error as well. So okay, here is how we make API calls using fetch. The fetch API, we have used the fetch API to make an API call to this particular URL endpoint. So let's just try and go to this endpoint, and here you can see that all this data that we got here is printed as well. So if I go to slash to do slash one, maybe only one to do will be printed. And here also if I go to slash one, only one to do is here. So this is a way where our code can interact with data on the internet and in a readable, usable way called JSON. Okay. Up till now, any questions thus far? Something you might not have understood or you might want me to repeat about promises. I'm sorry, but your voice is not clear. Um,
Hello.
yeah. Um, I can't hear you, my man.
So sir, now Vatsal is typing it in Discord, I guess.
Acha, okay, great. Yeah, so what is fetch is doing right here is the very first thing it is doing is getting the response and converting it to JSON. And then here I have, this is a callback function that is run. So ये एक बार हो गया JSON में convert. अब I can what this is doing is it is returning the JSON data from the previous callback. So this is using JSON data from previous then. Or here I can do anything with the data, but in this case I have just console.logged it. एंड कैच में भी ये भी एक कॉल बैक ही ले रहा है, मतलब ये एक फंक्शन है और ये फंक्शन में मैं कुछ भी कर सकता हूँ. दिस इज अ फंक्शन टू हैंडल एरर्स and this dot then is to use that JSON, or this is just converting the raw response, raw HTTP response जो हम लोग ने देखा बहुत क्रिप्टिक था, उसको वो रीडेबल जेसॉन में कन्वर्ट कर रहा है. response.json will return another promise that we are using in this next dot then. Does this clear your doubt, Vatsal? Amazing. Okay, बाकी लोग भी you all can vote on Discord if you understood everything till now or not. And now let's move on. Okay, so now that we have seen promises, but JavaScript in its recent version have launched this amazing syntactic sugar called async await. Here, as you could see, there was a problem, right? We were continuously chaining dot then dot then dot then like this. And if, for example, if I want to use this promise ka data and call another API endpoint, that would be a problem, right? So I can use async await to solve that problem. Now let's try and write an async function first. So I'll create a new file async.js, and inside of this file let me write an async function called const get ingredients, which is a function उस ये फंक्शन बहुत ही सिंपल है. इसमें इंग्रेडिएंट्स का एक ऑब्जेक्ट है जो नाम को उसके इमोजी से मैप कर रहा है. तो ब्रेड हो गया और अवाकाडो ले लेते हैं, वो इमोजी है. ये रहा. And what this does is this takes in a key and this returns वो ingredients और उसमें जो की है वो. अभी let me just test out this function get ingredients. अगर could anyone tell me what will be printed to the console now if I run a node of async.js? What will be printed to the console? What will be printed? I saw somebody was unmuting. Please go ahead. Yeah, right answer. As Vinay said, the bread emoji will be printed to the console. So now if I run this, I see that the bread emoji is printed because this function does that. But now, if this function is asynchronous, what this function will do is it will not return this directly. It will return a promise that on resolving will return the emoji. So in this async function, if I want to use this function like that, I will have to do something like dot then get response, and वो response को फिर मैं console dot log करूँगा response को. इधर मैंने res लिखा है, re कुछ भी लिख सकता हूँ, ये मेरा चॉइस है. abc भी लिखा तो भी ठीक है. तो again same thing is happening. So what an async function, adding async before our arguments, what this will do is this will make our function asynchronous in nature. Okay, but this in itself is not as useful. But what is actually powerful is when we combine this async keyword with await. which gives us the power to pause the execution of a function. So if I take this async wala function and now I want to write maybe another function. For example, I want to write a function called make sandwich. And what this function does is, this is also an async function. It will get the responses from get ingredients. It will go and get the two ingredients A and get the ingredient avocado and B bread. And what this returns is an array of both of these. But since, imagine this for now is we are fetching from here, right? But imagine if we are fetching from a remote API using fetch, what that would do is that would return a promise, and this async function is returning a promise right now. So what we need to do is we need to wait for the promise to resolve. One way of doing is using fetch, but another way is using the await keyword right here. So what I'm doing in make sandwich is I'm waiting for this results and then returning them. So now I can just make sandwich और उसके रिजल्ट को मैं अगर console log करूँगा तो क्या आएगा बताओ. What will get console.logged because of this when I run node of await.js? What will get logged?
Vatsal is
Yes.
avocado emoji and then red emoji.
Yes, so we will get this array as the response and this will be printed to the console. Great. So now let's try and write this same cool code using fetch. So any suggestions how can I do this? Anyone would like to unmute and help me write make sandwich 1, which will not be an async function. So without async await using fetch, I want to write the get sandwich 1 function. Any suggestions? Using the fetch like syntax, not using fetch, but fetch like syntax, we can make sandwich था ना. Make sandwich. So we will first have to get the ingredients, and after getting that first ingredient, first I need avocado, and then when I get the avocado, I will have to save that avocado somehow. So I'll have to first create a variable outside this. So I'll have to say let a, and when I get the avocado, I'll have to save that avocado inside of that variable, and right here I'll have to return another promise to be used in the next dot then, and here I'll have to get the bread. And now after getting this bread, I will again have to change this, get the bread, and now I can finally return a comma b, avocado and bread. So as you can see, this code is much less readable than the one here, but again this will function exactly the same way. So I can say make sandwich 1 dot then get the response, and console.log the response. And now if I run node of await.js, एक second, function call dot. Oh, okay. I have to return this promise as well. Okay. Now you can see why is this so cryptic, right? So now if I run await.js, I'll see that this is working the exact same way as this wala function, but in a much less concise way. So this was much better. Again, there are ways to enhance the speed of this by using something called promises.all, but we won't get into that for as of now. So alright, this was everything we need to know about fetch, async, await, and promises. Now let's try and understand the event loop. So I have an amazing animation for that. Let me just paste it here. This is an animation that I've taken from an amazing talk uh, by a engineer at Google at a JavaScript annual conference 5 years ago. So this is the best explanation of the event loop. I will share this video after I finish. You can check it out, and I have learned everything about the event loop from this video. So okay, so JavaScript has something called an event loop which is responsible for executing your code. So again this disappears. Huh. Okay, so you can think of an event loop of something looking something like this. So the browser is always running a single threaded event loop to run your code. So on the first round, so matlab ये it is going again and again. So on the first round, it will run all your synchronous code, but it will also queue up all your asynchronous code to be executed later. So for example, here this function right here was my asynchronous code, but first priority in the event loop is for synchronous code. So let me just so that using some code, what should I call it? Event loop.js. And here, uh, so let me just explain. So in the first round, all your synchronous code gets executed, and it will queue up all your asynchronous tasks, like a promise, resolving a promise. So what when you fetch data, the event loop is told that you tell the event loop I want to go and fetch this data. The event loop will give you a separate thread pool where you can go and fetch the data, and when that data is ready you tell the event loop, okay, I'm ready to be called back. I'll just show an example of this by coding it, but for now that data will call back the event loop and let the event loop know that okay, data is ready. The event loop will say, okay, I will execute that callback before my before my next loop. So a resolved promise is a micro task that is resolved before the starting of the next loop. But there is also something called as a macro task. Macro tasks are like set timeout, set interval functions that are built right into JavaScript, and when they are ready to be executed, they get executed at the beginning of the next event loop. So macro task at the end, at the beginning of the next event loop, and micro task at the before starting only the next event loop. okay, this might be too much to grasp, but let me just demonstrate it using some code. Synchronous one. Let me write a macro task, and here I want to write a set timeout of 0 milliseconds, and after 0 milliseconds I want to console.log timeout, and here I can write a micro task, a resolved promise. So I'm just writing this syntax, you don't need to worry about it. So what this does is just gives us a resolved promise, empty resolved promise. So here a resolved promise would give us this, but this will just give us a random resolved promise, empty resolved promise I mean. And either callback may I will write console.log promise and console.log synchronous 2. Okay. Um, if I run this file, could anyone tell me in what order these console.logs will be printed to the console? What order will this console.logs be shown in the console? I see someone is typing. What order?
We have synchronous 1, timeout, promise, and synchronous 2. And Vinay has written sync 1, sync 2, promise, and timeout. So which one of this is correct?
Okay, let's find out. So the first one is wrong. This won't be printed in this order because recall the event loop. So event loop will execute all our synchronous code first. So this right here is synchronous, this is synchronous, but this is all asynchronous. So when I run this line of code gets executed, I see that synchronous one is printed. But when it comes to this line, this is a macro task and will be queued up for the next event cycle. So ये अभी मैं इसको next करूँगा तो कुछ नहीं होगा. As you can see, nothing is printed here. Now comes the promise, which is a micro task. And अब इसको भी अगर मैं execute करता हूँ तो कुछ नहीं होगा. This will also be queued up for the next event cycle. But now this if I run will be printed. And now is where things get interesting. As I said, a micro task will be executed right before starting the next event cycle, and the macro task will get executed right after the event cycle. So up if I execute this, synchronous 2 will be executed, and then before starting, now that the next cycle is started, the micro task is executed first, this promise is resolved, and then the timeout is resolved, which is a macro task. I hope I was able to explain this well. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask. If Okay, make sure you all vote on Discord if you have understood this. Okay, I see a couple of yeses. Great. Jay, do we have a quiz right now?
Yes, yes, we have a quiz.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we'll start now. You see my screen? I think I'm gonna share an API. Okay. What function do we use to receive data from the API? Get, fetch, call, or use API? Which one is it? I hope you guys can see my screen, huh? Okay, so 3, 2, 1, and time's up. The correct answer is fetch, and all 10 have answered correctly. So good. Let's see the leaderboard. Okay. We have God leading us, and then we have Vinay, Vatsal, SS, and so on. So let's go ahead. Okay, second question. That's supposed to get more points. That's the rule. Okay. In the event loop, which tasks are executed first? Asynchronous, asynchronous, both are executed together first and depends on the task. So which of the event loop, which in the event loop, which tasks are executed first? Okay, time's up. And the answer is synchronous function. 8 people have answered correctly. So let's see who are these 8 people. If you guys have any doubts in any of the questions, just put it on Discord. Hussein will explain it to you. So let's see. Okay, God is leading, and now we have SS, Vatsal, Carl Gustav, and Vinay. Okay, great. Next question. Now the third question. By using async as a keyword to the function, which keyword can we use with the functions from which we want some response to be returned? So is it the resolve, reject, await, or none of these? By using the async as keyword to the function. Okay, everybody answered, and await is the correct answer. 7 people have answered correctly. Okay. So let's see the leaderboard again. Okay, so Vatsal is leading, then Carl Gustav, SS, so on. Let's go ahead. Fourth question. Which function do we use to return /log the output from the promise we resolve? Is it .then, .next, .log, or .return? What function do we use to return or log the output? 3, 2, 1, and thumbs up. Okay, so .then is the correct answer, and 5 people have answered correctly, 2 people have answered wrong. Let's see. Okay, so we have Vinay is leading now, then we have SS, Vatsal, God, Carl Gustav, Piho, and further on. The fifth and last question. I'm supposed to get more points. What are the parameters we pass to the promise function? Is it the reject, resolve, all of the above, or none of the above? What are the parameters we pass to the promise function? Second, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and time's up. Okay, so all of the above, that is the reject and resolve, are the parameters we pass to a promise function. 7 people have answered correctly. Amazing. Okay, so Let's see. Okay, so Vinay is again the winner. Congratulations, Vinay. Then we have SS, Vatsal, Carl Gustav, who answered the fastest, Yo, Nishit, and so on. So congratulations, Vinay.
Okay, great. So now let's try and build uh, the backend for our to-do app that we built last week. So last week we had built a to-do app using React, but now let's try and build a backend RESTful API for our front end. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so I've created an empty folder called to do backend, and inside of this folder I will write code for my REST API that I will build using this framework that is built on top of Node.js and is called Express. So before I start, let me just instantiate an empty node project. So I can do that by saying npm init dash y. मतलब npm create a project or dash y मतलब it will ask a bunch of questions and just say yes to everything. So now I have a package.json that is built for me. So what this package of .json does is this keeps track of all my dependencies that I will install. For example, I want to install Express, so I can say npm I express, and inside of this dependencies ka object you can see that Express has been added, and here a node modules folder is created, and this node modules folder contains in it all the code for that the Express package has that we didn't write, but we just took it from the internet. So we do not have to modify anything inside of this folder and should not modify anything inside of this folder. Uh, and now we have Express installed. So let's change a couple of things in our package.json. I will want my main file to be called server.js, and I want the type of this project to be module because I want to use the import export syntax that I've been using for React as well. So now I can also so now I'll have to create a new file called server.js. So this will be the entry point for my project. Um, and here I can start writing my Express code. So Express lets us create our API. So to create our API, let's just first import Express from Express, and this Express is a function itself. So to instantiate an instance of the Express function, I'll just create a variable, call it app, and assign it to this function. So now what this does is this initializes, instantiates, better said, an Express इंस्टेंस. तो ये ऐप के को यूज करके मुझे एक्सप्रेस का पावर मिल रहा है. तो अब I can say something like app.listen. This listen is built inside of Express का ये instance, और the first argument that the listen function takes is the port number. So I can say port 805 for example. So now this app will listen at this port. अब ये पोर्ट क्या है, हम लोग को जब एक्सेस करेंगे ये एक्सप्रेस को लोकल मशीन पे, सो वी विल यूज लोकल होस्ट, और ये जो है ये पोर्ट है, ये लोकल होस्ट कोलन पोर्ट. सो दिस इज द फर्स्ट आर्ग्यूमेंट फॉर for our express app. Listen का function, express app में listen का function. Okay, so now we want to run this, right? So we can say node server.js, and now our server is running. If I reload, I see that instead of getting the 404 error message, I am getting what Express is wants to show me, that I cannot get this. It is showing the error message. But again, this is not really helpful, right? This is empty. I don't know if my server has started or not. So the second argument that listen takes is a callback. And inside of this callback, I can say that server is listening at localhost 8005. Okay, and now if I again run server.js, I see that server is listening at this port. Okay, so now that I have some feedback from the listen function, let me know that if you all are able to follow along up till now or not. Were you able to set up an Express app, and were you able to log this in your console? Uh, okay, I see thumbs up. Um, okay, amazing. Any questions? Feel free to interrupt. Listening for requests. And now let's try and define an endpoint for our app. So when we wrote this fetch function here, when we made this fetch call, this was an API endpoint, right? Slash to do slash one. So using Express, we can do that as well. And again, um, how do we get access to this in the HTTP context is that we can see there are various methods for sending HTTP requests. You can send a get request, you can send a post request, you can send a patch request, delete request, and all this is provided in this autocomplete as well. I can see get, I can see post as well, I can see put as well here. So these are HTTP verbs to perform some actions in the backend. So let's just start by using get. So if I try and get slash hello, I want to run this callback, and this here, this function, this callback right here takes in two arguments. So this is my URL endpoint localhost 8005 slash hello पे ये फंक्शन रन होगा, और ये फंक्शन को एक्सप्रेस दो आर्ग्यूमेंट्स देगा. पहला आर्ग्यूमेंट रिक्वेस्ट ऑब्जेक्ट, और दूसरा रिस्पॉन्स, जो हमें रिस्पॉन्स यूजर को देना है. ओके, सो द रिक्वेस्ट इज द इनकमिंग डेटा. डेटा जो आ रहा है रिक्वेस्ट से वो रिक्वेस्ट है, और रिस्पॉन्स जो हम भेजेंगे. तो अभी के लिए लेट्स सेंड अ रिस्पॉन्स डॉट सेंड, and inside this I might want to say hello. So abhi I go to this khali port, I get nothing. Again I have to restart the server. We'll solve this problem as well. And if I go to slash hello, I see that hello is shown here. So this was the response that was sent. Okay, so let's just first solve this restarting the server का problem. We have an npm package for that called nodemon. So nodemon अपने आप handles everything, all this reloading for us. So npm install nodemon. Okay, sorry. npm install, and I can pass in an optional -d, which will say that this is a dev dependency, meaning I don't want to deploy it. It is just good practice to use it like this. Okay, so now you can see I have nodemon installed as well. So here let's try and write a script over here. So what is a script? So here if I write nodemon server.js, so the one way to start the server now is that nodemon is installed. I can say nodemon server.js. One way to start the server is in this way. But I want to start the server using nodemon, which is a dev dependency right here. So how do I do that? I can do that by updating my script and writing and telling it explicitly that on start the command I want to run is nodemon server.js. So if I say npm start, this command is run, and now nodemon is handling our server. So now if I say hello comma world, I don't have to restart the server myself. Nodemon will do that for me. You can see the server was restarted and now hello world is printed here. Okay, great. So instead of using complete words, we often use res for response and req for request. This will work the exact same way. And often we don't just send text response, we send JSON response. तो ये JavaScript का जो object है, this dot send method will take in as an argument and convert it to JSON for us. Amazing. Any questions thus far? Something you might not have understood and you want me to repeat? Make sure you vote in the on Discord. Okay, great. So now let's try and access this API in a better way. So accessing the API in the browser will give us some problems. Uh, when we use post request, so it will works great for get request, but when we use post request, it is very difficult to pass data using the browser. So I am using something called as Thunder client. So Thunder client is available as an extend VS Code extension. You can install it by going to extension and searching for Thunder client. You can also use something like Postman, which uh, which also works in a similar way as well. So now if I make a request to this endpoint here, localhost 8005/hello, I see that this JSON is given to me, which is right here. So I'll be using Thunder client to make API calls from now. Okay, great. So now let's write a post request. So as I said before, there are many HTTP verbs like post, put, delete, patch, put, update. But what we mainly use in general in backend programming is get and post. These two are most frequently used, and we'll be focusing on these two for now. So I can say app dot post. When you post on slash to do slash new. Again, this was just for introduction. I'll remove it. So what we are trying to do is build a backend REST API for our to-do app, right? That we built last week. So उसमें on posting on this URL endpoint, I want to run this function that takes in two arguments, request and response. And now what I might want to do is I want to somehow get access to data passed by the front end. तो ये बैकएंड को, ये राउट को तो पता नहीं कि टू डू क्या है, टू डू का टेक्स्ट जो है वो क्या है। तो वो टू डू का टेक्स्ट मुझे रिक्वेस्ट ऑब्जेक्ट से मिलेगा। ये रिक्वेस्ट ऑब्जेक्ट इसके बॉडी वाले फील्ड में, हियर यू कैन सी आई हैव क्वेरी हेडर ऑथ बॉडी, this will all be passed inside the request, and here in request if I pass maybe say text example to do 0, so this I can access over here. How can I access this? I can access it using a request dot body dot name of that field. So this is my to do ka text that I will pass in some time. So console name, let me save it in a variable to do text which will be equal to request dot body dot text. तो रिक्वेस्ट के बॉडी वाले फील्ड में जो टेक्स्ट होगा ना जेसॉन में, वो चाहिए मुझे। और मैं रिस्पॉन्ड कर लूंगा रिस्पॉन्स डॉट सेंड to do with the to do text that the user sent for now, but we will have to create a new to do inside our database, so that we'll do later. But now let's try and figure out why this will not work. If I make a API call to this will not work. If I send, I see an error. अच्छा ये reason नहीं था. Change method post. Okay, now I see an error and I see that this property is undefined. request.body जो है वो undefined है, मतलब वो readable नहीं है। ये प्रॉब्लम को सॉल्व करने के लिए we will use something called as a middleware. So what a middleware is that before running this callback, the request will go through a middleware. So Express has a couple of built-in middleware, but here we need one particular middleware, the one that will convert the incoming request to readable JSON. So for now, what the problem is that this is undefined because this text ka field is not readable JSON. So we have passed JSON, but here you can see there's XML, text, form. There are so many formats, but we haven't told our backend what format we are following. So we have a middleware for that, and to use that middleware, I can say something like use this middleware before any other request, app.use express.json. तो express dot में एक json करके एक मेथड है जिसके अंदर वो मिडलवेयर लिखा है, उसको we don't have to worry anything about it. So that is already done for us. And now let me just save it. Node1 will restart the server for me. And now if I send the request, I see that my to do text is printed over here. So this was about post requests and middleware. Now as you can see, if I'm writing multiple functions here, my code will get really cluttered, right? Everything is in this one file. So for that, Express has a built-in router. But before I start with routers, any questions thus far? Something that you might not have understood. Okay, that's great. So now let me start with a router. So I will go ahead and create a new folder called routes, and inside of this route I will maybe say a new file todo.js, and I want to write all my routes over here. So I'll import router from Express, and I will save, I will create a variable. I can call it to do router, and I will call the router function on this variable. ये router that I'm getting from Express, and I will also export by default this to do router. And now instead of writing all my routes over here, I can separate my routes in separate files. So to do का सारा एक जगह, authentication का सारा अलग जगह, like that. So I can say app dot use to do, and now we want to use the to do router instead of using app.post or app.get directly on the main Express instantiation. So here I can the first argument it takes is the URL start point, and then I can say maybe to do router to do.js. It will import it from /route/to do.js. तो अब अगर मैं ये इधर से हटा के इधर लाओ और app डॉट पोस्ट की जगह to do router डॉट पोस्ट करूँ, so now what will happen is this स्लैश वाला राउट खाली राउट उधर रीडायरेक्ट होगा इधर, और इधर वो देखेगा स्लैश टू डू स्लैश न्यू को अगर मैंने किया तो ये फंक्शन कॉल हो रहा है, और हम लोग देख भी सकते हैं रिक्वेस्ट भेजने के बाद दिस फंक्शन राइट हियर इज बीइंग कॉल्ड. So this is a router, but again I don't want to, I want all my to do routes to start with URI endpoints to start with slash to do. So either ही if I say slash to do and over here I am saying slash new, then इधर का मिला के और उधर का मिला के ये to do slash new में जाएगा और ये सेम to do प्रिंट होगा, मतलब रिटर्न होगा एज JSON. Okay, great. Now we want to write a get request भी लिख देते एक for all getting all to do. So I can say to do router dot get slash all पे request response, and now this function is run. So here I can maybe I have all my to do, so I can just write a placeholder for now. I will soon connect MongoDB and we will see that as well. So ये हो गया ID text follow at Boy on GitHub and complete का status. This is the same type of object that I used last week in the front end. And now what I want to do is response. I want to send it response.send all to do's. Okay, तो ये जो JavaScript का array है, this will be converted to JSON array and everything will be done by for us by Express. So now if I go to do slash all error, acha, get request, I see that this object is array of objects is printed for me. Okay. Great. So now we have written two routes, one for getting, another for posting to do's, and now we might want to write one for updating the state of the to do, right? So last week we did that. We traversed over the array of to do's, got the to do का ID using the got the to do we needed using the ID and updated that to do, right? So अभी हम लोग एक नया राउट लिखते हैं to do router, इसको भी post route लिखते हैं, We can write it as a patch or put, but again, I said most backend developers usually stick to get and post only, and I'll do the same as well. And now here I need a couple of things to update the to do. What are the two things that I needed last week? And I said it now as well. Could anyone let me know what were the two things I need to update the to do? I need two things. Yeah, I need the ID, correct. Okay, let's start by getting the ID. I will need one more thing to toggle it. I'm sorry, not to update it, but to toggle the state of to do. What else do I need? Uh, but for now, let's just go with ID. So I can say that to do स्लैश वो आईडी पे मुझे ये फंक्शन रन करना है. अभी ये आईडी जो है ये यूआरएल पैरामीटर है, राइट? So how do I access this? I can access this using express का request object. I can say const id is equal to request dot params dot id, and let me just send this id again to the front end. तो अभी if I go to do slash an id, I get whatever, get नहीं है, post है, I get whatever this id is inside the URL returned over here. So now we know how to read the parameter of the URL. But again, I'm not going to use this method. I will just pass the ID inside of the body of the post request. So I will do something like ID इधर पास करने का, कुछ भी ID होगा, वो टू डू को somehow लाने का, और वो टू डू को का कंप्लीट स्टेटस जानना होगा. मतलब करंट कंप्लीट स्टेटस, करंट कंप्लीट स्टेटस मतलब अभी कंप्लीट है कि नहीं. अगर है तो, अगर कंप्लीट नहीं है तो उसको कंप्लीट करो, अगर कंप्लीट था तो फिर से इनकम्प्लीट करो. वी आर टॉगलिंग लाइक वी डिड लास्ट वीक. सो नाउ आई कैन से रिक्वेस्ट डॉट बॉडी से आईडी भी आएगा, और ऐसे ही रिक्वेस्ट डॉट बॉडी से करंट कंप्लीट स्टेटस भी आएगा. And I will just return both of these things for now. Okay, amazing. And I will just call this endpoint toggle maybe. So toggle. All right, great. So I have written routes for getting all of the to-dos, getting a new to-do, creating a new to-do, and toggling the state of an existing to-do given the ID and current complete status. Again, there is better way to write this syntactically. I can say id comma this and request dot body. This is called array. JavaScript में this is called destructuring of an object, and we can use this right here to get access to these variables. Now if I send this request, again same response. This is just more readable, so to say. And again, I'm not passing this key value because by default if I write the name of the variable, JavaScript will assume for me that I want the key and value to be the same thing. But if I suppose want to change it to only status, so now I get status. Great. So now we have written routes for everything. Now let's try and connect this to MongoDB. So now what we want to do is connect our Express REST API to a database. which will be hosted elsewhere. Before I get started with database, just make sure that you all have understood this for now. अगर any questions अभी पूछ लो, then we will start with MongoDB. Again, there are better ways of writing this code. I can just move this inside of a new folder called controller, but I will not do it now. I can move all these callbacks to a different file to better manage my code. Okay, I don't see any questions. Hope you all have understood everything. Great. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try and connect MongoDB. So I'll go to mongodb.com, click on sign in. Please follow along. This is important. So I'll just share the link for this in this on Discord. तो ये इधर जाओ, and I will log into my account. So which account did I use? हाँ ये वाला. So I'm signing in with Google. You won't see this screen. What you will see is something like this, where you will see that you have no organizations. Click on create new organization, name it anything. I have named my organization to do testing, and then go inside of that organization, create a new project. I have already created a project called to do 0, but for demonstration sake, I will just go ahead and create a new project called to do 1. Click on create project. I will click on build a database. I'll choose a free tier. Leave all the default settings as is. Let me just create a username and password. So I'll name this to do man username, password. Click on create user. Make sure you remember the password. We will need to remember the password. And here I will just add an entry to allow all IP addresses requests. Allow all IPs. So I'll just paste this here as well. Description is optional, and I'll click on add entry. So now I have a user to do man, and I remember the password. I have allowed all IPs to get access to this database, and I'll finish and close. Now let me go to this database. Amazing. While this database is being created, a MongoDB cluster is being initiated. Let's install dependencies to communicate with the MongoDB right here. So I can say npm I mongoose. Mongoose is the name of the package. Uh, Here I can say npm I mongoose and install a dependency right here. So mongoose allows us to communicate with the MongoDB database. So I'll just import mongoose inside of my server.js file. And now what I need to do is I want to connect to the database. So how do I connect to the database? I can say mongoose dot connect, and what this takes in is a URI. And how do I get that URI? I can only get it once this cluster is being created. But while that is happening, let me introduce you to .env. So uh, since this URI, if you know this my URI, you can connect to my database. So to prevent that from happening, and assuming that my repository is going to be public, I will save all this data inside of a .env and add .env to git ignore. So inside of my database .env, I'll create a variable called database URL, and here I will enter the URL. And how will I access it here? I can access .env using process.env dot database URL, but I cannot directly use this functionality. I'll have to install another dev dependency for that, called .env. Jai, if you could share the repository for the source code on Discord, that would be great for
Yes,
people following along.
sure, sure.
So here I will have my database URL, and now that my cluster is ready, I can click on connect your application, and I copy paste this uh, URL. I'll paste it here. I will change the password to whatever password I had set, and now this database is ready to be connected. So like this line of code will connect to MongoDB ka cluster, and now we want to save the connection. Save the connection in a variable that I will call db, and say mongoose dot connection दो. और अभी just for good coding practice, I will handle errors. I will say db dot on error, take the error and console.log the error. This is just for error handling, but what we actually care about is the success callback. सक्सेस कॉल बैक मतलब ये डेटाबेस कनेक्ट हो गया तो मुझे बता दो. सो db dot on sorry db dot once. So this here we can add in a listener, so I can say something like db dot once, the database is open. I can console.log connected to db. Okay, great. So now let me cross my fingers. Acha, before I to use this, I have to import the .env package upper. So I will have to import .env slash config bus. And now if I run npm start, I see that connected to db, spelling galat tha. हाँ, connected to db is logged in my console. So now I am connected to MongoDB. This was a handful. We have now successfully connected our backend Express app to this remote MongoDB cluster that is hosted somewhere in the United States on maybe a Google. I don't know. It is hosted right here in Mumbai mein, using AWS. In the starting, recall that we could also customize where our database is hosted. So using this URL, we are able to connect to this MongoDB cluster. Let's just browse collections and we'll see that the database is currently empty. So there's nothing inside of my database. So now I need to store all my to-dos inside of the database. So let me start by first defining the structure of my data. So models में I will create a new file called todo.js, and here I will define the structure of my document. So I can say let me create a variable to do structure. I can call it to do structure, or I can call it something called schema. So schema is the word that we use to define the structure, but you can call it anyway. And the way to define a schema using Mongoose is I can say mongoose dot schema, and inside this schema takes an object as an argument. So अब object है, key value pairs डालेंगे. तो की टेक्स्ट, मुझे टेक्स्ट स्टोर करना है टू डू का. अभी उसको थोड़ा एडिशनल इन्फॉर्मेशन देते हैं कि स्ट्रिंग होना चाहिए वो टेक्स्ट, और डिफॉल्ट वैल्यू दे देते हैं. मतलब अगर कुछ भी स्ट्रिंग एम्प्टी है तो सेव इट टू मे बी अननोन टू डू. एंड वन मोर फील्ड वी नीड इज कंप्लीट. तो ये एक बूलियन था इफ यू रिकॉल लास्ट वीक, और उसका डिफॉल्ट होगा false. I need one more field. I needed one more field last week, last to last week. If anyone recalls, could you tell me what was that field? For now, I added two fields, right? Text and complete. I used one more field last when building React. What was that? Building the to-do app in React. Yeah, ID again, right? So why I'm not using why I'm not mentioning ID explicitly here is because Mongoose का जो स्कीमा है वो बाय डिफॉल्ट हर एक चीज के लिए एक आईडी बना के रखेगा. मतलब ये स्कीमा में मेरे को आईडी फ्री मिल रहा है, मैं बोलूँ नहीं बोलूँ वो आईडी होगा ही. ओके, तो अभी के लिए बस ये दो चीज चाहिए. लेट मी जस्ट एक्सपोर्ट दिस नाउ. So what will I export? I do not want to export my to-do schema, but I want to export a Mongoose model. So Mongoose model, I want to name it to-do. So Mongoose का जो मॉडल होता है वो एक जावास्क्रिप्ट क्लास की तरह समझो, जिसको यूज करके हम अपना डेटा मैनिपुलेट कर पाएंगे MongoDB पे. So I can say mongoose dot model to do and to do schema. I can also provide a third argument. This is something that Jay told me, that inside of this model function I can also pass in a third argument where I can customize the name of what I want this collection to be called in my database, but I won't do that now. So now I have successfully created a mongoose model. So now the first thing I want to do is go to my routes, and all पे ये hard code चीज return करने की जगह I want to return to do एक कैपिटल टू डू वाला टी वाला टू डू है जो मॉडल से मैं इंपोर्ट कर रहा हूँ. There I want to return all. So the way of returning all, and this is an amazing summarization of documents, summarization of the docs, MongoDB docs, that a famous YouTuber has created. I'll share the link to that after I finish this. here he has listed all the methods that are available for reading the database, creating objects inside the database, and updating the database as well. So here inside read, if he's given an example of find. So the find, what does it do? It returns all the documents inside of that collection. So if I say to do dot find, वो सारे to do लौटाएगा. But but what this find does is this returns a promise. Again, this code will have to be asynchronous to support this. So I cannot simply say const all to do's is equal to do dot find, because this is asynchronous. I will have to do, I'll have to wait for it. How can I wait for it? Any suggestions? We started learning everything about the event loop, promises, async, await for this. So assuming that this returns a promise, what do we need to do? Yeah, right. Go ahead. First thing, I need to make this an async function. Get suggestion. Now what do I have to do? Yeah, I'll now await for the to-dos. Great, amazing. And I will await for the to-dos dot find thing to run. So what this will do is this will go contact that remote database, get all the to-dos from there. And now if I go to to-do slash all, error, अच्छा post नहीं है, get है. हाँ, and now you can see empty array. Why empty array? क्योंकि मेरे डेटाबेस में कुछ है ही नहीं. ये मेरा टू डूज है, ये खाली है, इधर कुछ है ही नहीं. And you can see that to do's is created because I have defined my schema right here. Amazing. So now let's try and write a route to create a new to do. How will I create a new to do? I will use MongoDB का structure to create my to do. So here I can say um, I want to create a new to do, और ये to do में मैं चाहता हूँ कि to do का जो टेक्स्ट है वो to do टेक्स्ट हो. To do text I'm getting from the request का body. And complete, as you recall, I had already defined a default state for it, so that was false पहले से ही, so that does not matter. I will just separate out this थोड़ा. Get all, create new, toggle array. Okay, so this will create a new to do. अभी ये नए to do को मैं एक वेरिएबल में सेव करता हूँ, उसको मैं saved to do बोलूंगा, and this is a saved to do. Or now to actually execute this query, this is a JavaScript object. जो Mongo का जो to do है उसका मैंने ऑब्जेक्ट बनाया, उसके कंस्ट्रक्टर में मैंने टेक्स्ट पास किया. अभी I will have to save to do पे I'll have to call the save function, and again this is an asynchronous event. ये say dot save asynchronous है, तो I will have to await it, and again like I did previously make this function asynchronous. And now instead of returning to do, I will say saved to do text return करने की जगह मैं save to do return कर दूंगा इधर response में. Or maybe if I want I can send a message also कि सब ठीक हुआ, a message to do created. Okay, so here now let's try and send a request. So as you can see now अभी database में कुछ नहीं है. Logged in documents, query results 0. But now I will add some text. Example to do 0. And now I'll make a post request to the /new route. And let me just open the response. And you can see that I've got a message of to do created and I've got the information of save to do. And now if I refresh this, I will see here that an example to do is created for me with a complete status और default जो false है और object ID ये ID automatically create हुआ है, मैंने कुछ नहीं किया है. और ये underscore v you don't need to worry about it. This is just to keep maintain the version of my API. This is done by default by MongoDB, so you don't need to worry about it. Okay, so we can create a new to do. Now if I call the all route here, get request, my bad, I see that this to do is returned for me. Let me just add one more to do for example purposes. Example to do 1, post request /new, and this to do 1 was also created successfully. Example to do 0, example to do 1. अभी बस एक चीज बचा है. We want to toggle our to do. But before we go there, any questions? Feel free to ask. Discord में बोलो, इधर unmute करके बोलो, कुछ भी चलेगा. I have Discord open here. Any questions thus far? Any questions before we move on to? Okay, great. I don't see any questions. I hope everyone has understood. So now we'll write our toggle to do का function. Abhi I want to go and get update then existing to do based on the ID and change its state as well. So to do that, I can do something like I'll write a query here. ये इतना बड़ा नाम रखने की जगह I'll just call it complete, है कि नहीं? It is much more easier to read as well. So now I will write my query. So to do dot update, and the first argument that update one takes, again I'm referring to this amazing summarization of the documentation, but again here are the full entire docs also. So I've shared it on Discord, the entire MongoDB ka CRUD, create, update, read, delete ka docs. But I'll just refer the summarization, and here you can see that the update one, the first argument that it takes is to filter out which one you want to update. So which to do we want to update? We want to update the to do where ID जो है वो बराबर है ये ID के जो request.body में आ रहा है. और सेकेंड आर्ग्यूमेंट जो ये लेगा, ये पहला ऑब्जेक्ट हो गया, पहला आर्ग्यूमेंट, और सेकेंड आर्ग्यूमेंट में ये सेट करके एक की देना पड़ेगा वो ऑब्जेक्ट को set, we want to set, what do we want to set? We want to set the complete status to whatever the complete status was given by the front end, उसका उल्टा. So I first filtered that to do and then I set it to a new complete status जो कि पहले वाले का उल्टा था. And now I will have to await this because this is asynchronous again. Wait and write this as an async function. And now I can just send a response of message to do status updated. Okay, so now let me just make a get request to all the to-dos. I see that I have all the to-dos over here. And now if let me just write the body for the toggle. The toggle takes in an ID and it takes in the previous का complete status. मतलब क्या किसका उल्टा करना है. तो वो वाला आईडी जो है वो आईडी इधर पास करूंगा और उसका जो कंप्लीट स्टेटस है, अभी जो कंप्लीट स्टेटस है ये आईडी का वो फॉल्स है एंड आई वांट टू सेट इट टू ट्रू. And now if I make an API request to toggle, I send this request. Let me just show you before I start कि ये वाले आईडी का 6210C वाला, अच्छा सब 62 किधर चेंज है, 690 ओके. तो ये जो CDE4 वाला आईडी है, CDE4 वाला आईडी, उसका कंप्लीट स्टेटस फॉल्स से ट्रू होगा ये रिक्वेस्ट जाने के बाद. सो पोस्ट रिक्वेस्ट है, I send the request, I get a success message, to do status updated. And now if I go to /all, I will see that get request /all, I see that ये complete status flip नहीं हुआ है for some reason. Oh, okay, I sent true तो वो false हो गया. अच्छा, I had to send false. This is reversing. तो toggle post request to do status updated. और अभी अगर मैं all में जाऊंगा तो ये status true है और इधर भी if I refresh, किधर गया refresh, हाँ, I see that the complete status is true. Now there are many ways to improve this code. We can separate all our callbacks into a separate controllers का folder following the MVC model view controller format. We can also write something called as joy validation as well for this. But I think this much is enough for now. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Jay, are you taking over?
So now
Yes,
we
I'll
have
be
a
taking
quiz.
over. Yeah, we have a quiz now.
React imports in Node.js. What line do we have to add to package.json? Is it impact React, type module, and oh sorry, the codes. I missed the codes. And type module again with the codes. Check the codes, people. Time's up. And okay, so code type colon module is the correct syntax for that. बाकी का import React is wrong, and type module is again wrong because type should also be in code. So Sam, you want to add anything to this?
No, this is just JSON का structure.
Achha, cool.
Sub key value.
Okay. So we have Vinay leading, fastest, amazing. Okay, the question 2 is first you get more points. Which function of Mongos do we need to use to connect to the MongoDB cluster? Is it cluster connect, listen, or import? Five seconds remaining. Okay, so connect is the correct answer, and 3 people have answered correctly. Cluster connect is the wrong answer. Okay, so the Hustler, Vinay, Vatsal have answered correctly. So again, Vinay is first, the Hustler, Vatsal, so on. Okay. Which of the following is the correct way of creating a schema in MongoDB? Is it mongoose.schema brackets, then mongoose.create schema brackets, mongoose export schema, or mongoose.schema? Which one is it? A schema with a capital S, the last one. Everyone has voted, and okay, so mongoose.schema where schema is capital is the correct answer. Let's see. Okay. Jay Gohut has gone ahead, I guess. Okay, so we have Vinay, the fastest, then Vatsal, Jay Gohut, and so on. Question 4. Okay, so how do we return JSON data from an express router? Okay, is it res.sendJSON, res.json bracket, or res.statusJSON, or res.parse? So 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1, and okay, so res.json bracket is the correct answer. This hyphen there is a mistake. I'm sorry. So let's see who was the one who answered correctly. So when I answered correctly, amazing.
No, Tanvi, that was right.
Huh?
Option was right. Option was not wrong.
Achha. Yeah, option was right. Yeah, sure. Okay, so next, 5th and the last question we have. Okay, which of the following is the middleware to process the data sent through HTTP request body? Is it req.parser, http.parse, body parser, or none of these? The middleware to process the data sent through HTTP request body. And time's up. Okay, so body parser is the correct answer, not request parser. So let's see the leaderboard. So we have Vinay and Hasla who answered correctly, and Vinay has won along with Hasla at the second, and third was, oh, I'm sorry, can't see your name at this moment. So congratulations, Hussain. Back to you now.
Jay, take over, please.
Yes, guys. So today we covered to-do ka backend application. So tomorrow we'll be looking at the Notion application. As you have heard of it, Notion application. We are creating a mock clone of it. So उसका backend कल code करेंगे. कल 2-2.5 घंटे में वो code हो जाएगा backend, and then we'll focus on the front end for Notion. So hope to see you guys tomorrow. I guess that was it for today.
Thank you for joining
I guess
in.
tomorrow we'll be having it on the same time.
Yeah.
So be there to get the further here. Notion, we'll be doing the backend of Notion as well. We're creating the Notion from scratch. So we hope to see you guys tomorrow.
Bye bye.